The vessel known as the Silent Requiem was not a warship. It was a library, a museum, a mausoleum for civilizations that had sung their last song. Its purpose was not conquest, but collection, a sacred duty of the Cygnian Concordance. They were the galaxy's quiet observers, arriving after a star had gone cold or a species had faded into the silence of its own making, to gather the echoes and preserve the memory of what was. On board, xenolinguist and historian Kalin was considered a prodigy, having translated the final psionic poems of the Silicon Life on Kepler 186f and decoded the light-based legal codes of the long-vanished Cygnus X1 entity. He was gentle, precise, and held a deep, unshakable faith in the Concordance's mission that all life, at its core, strove for harmony, and that failure to achieve it was a tragedy to be mourned, not a flaw to be judged. For the last 3 cycles, the Requiem had held a stationary orbit over a planet designated Sol 3, a vibrant blue marble the locals called Earth. The Concordance had marked it as a pre-resonance culture, a society on the cusp of either global unity or self-immolation, the 2 most common paths for sentient species. But Earth was an anomaly. Their instruments detected a unique energy signature, a socio-empathic wave, a psychic residue of immense power and complexity. The initial analysis by the ship's council suggested it was the lingering echo of a planetary golden age, a period of unparalleled peace and creativity so profound that it had permanently stained the planet's metaphysical fabric. They believed the current inhabitants, the humans, were the devolved, fractured descendants of this magnificent era, living amidst the ruins of a greatness they couldn't comprehend. The mission was simple: send a first contact team unarmed, of course, as was the Concordance way to make peaceful introductions, offer aid to, and begin the sacred work of archiving their lost history. The team was led by Kalin's own mentor, the venerable archivist Thorn, a being whose knowledge of fallen cultures was second to none. Thorn believed humanity was a child lost in its own ancestral home, a child that needed gentle guidance to find its way back to the light. Kalin had watched them depart in the lander, the Whisper, a vessel designed to make no sound, leave no trace. They chose a landing site in a region the natives called the Zone of Alienation, a place north of the ruins of a city named Chernobyl. The area was sparsely populated, and the lingering radiation, while trivial to the team's biosuits and would deter any local interference, was meant to be a quiet insertion, a week of passive observation before revealing themselves. That was 12 days ago. The first 7 days had proceeded as planned. Thorne's reports were filled with childlike wonder. He described the tenacity of Earth's biosphere, the strange, melancholic beauty of the decaying human structures, and the fragmented, chaotic nature of their global communications, which he likened to a choir where every member sang a different song in a different key. He was confident that with time, he could teach them the melody of their ancestors. On the 8th day, the reports stopped. The Whisper's life support signature vanished from the Requiem sensors. The biotrackers of the 5-member team, including Thorn, went dark simultaneously. There was no distress call, no surge of energy, no final, frantic message. There was only silence, a sudden and absolute void where 5 lives had been. The ship's council convened for 4 agonizing days. The official consensus was a tragic environmental event, perhaps an undiscovered pocket of extreme radiation, a geological collapse, or a catastrophic failure of the Whisper's systems. They decreed that Sol 3 was too unstable, too dangerous. The mission was a failure. The planet was to be reclassified as a fallen world, its story forever lost. They would hold a mourning ceremony for Thorn and his team, record their loss in the ship's archives, and move on to the next system, the next ghost. Kalen refused to accept it. He had known Thorn his entire life. The old archivist was meticulous, a master of risk assessment. The idea that he would be undone by a simple environmental hazard felt like a lie, a comfortable story told to soothe the fear of the unknown. In the ship's deep archives, Kalen accessed the final, fragmentary data packet the Whisper had managed to transmit before it went dark. It was mostly telemetry and atmospheric readings, but buried within was a single audio file from Thorn, less than 3 seconds long. It wasn't a warning or a cry for help. It was just Thorn's voice, hushed with a dawning horror that chilled Kalen to his core. "The patterns in their art," Thorn had whispered, his voice trembling not with fear, but with paradigm-shattering revelation. "They're not celebrating life. They're diagrams of death." That night, Kalen committed an act that would see him stripped of his rank and cast out of the Concordance if discovered. He went to the ship's subdeck, to the mnemonic vault, and authorized the launch of a ghost drone. It was a piece of technology the Concordance rarely used. A probe so advanced it was considered a violation of their non-interference ethos. The ghost was no larger than a grain of sand, capable of slipping through any sensor net, of observing without being observed. It moved on currents of light, its only purpose to see, to listen, and to remember. Kalen programmed its destination himself, the last known coordinates of the Whisper. He watched on his private console as the drone descended through the planet's atmosphere, a tiny god of memory falling into the unknown. The drone found the landing site within an hour. The Whisper was gone. Not crashed, not destroyed, vanished. The clearing in the irradiated forest was empty, save for an unnatural depression in the soil, as if the ship had been plucked from the world by an invisible hand. The drone expanded its search, following faint trails of alien alloys and exotic energy signatures that no native animal could have left. The trail led it miles underground, through a fissure in the earth so cleverly disguised with holographic emitters and geological camouflage that the Requiem's planetary scans had dismissed it as solid bedrock. Inside was a world that had no place in Kalen's understanding of the universe. It was a vast subterranean complex, a fusion of brutalist concrete architecture and technology so advanced it rivaled the Concordance's own. Here, the ghost drone found the Whisper. It was being systematically dismantled, not with crude tools, but with plasma cutters and gravity lifts that moved with terrifying precision. Every component was being scanned, analyzed, and cataloged by figures in sealed, black environmental suits. They moved with a silent, disciplined efficiency that spoke of generations of practice. These were not the fractured, chaotic primitives Thorn had described. These were something else entirely. Kalen's blood ran cold as the drone drifted deeper into the bioanalysis wing. There, on sterile tables, lay the bodies of Thorn and his team. But they were not being mourned or studied with reverence. They were being deconstructed. Their biosuits had been stripped away, their communication implants carefully extracted, their neural interfaces being reverse-engineered on adjacent terminals. Humans in sterile lab coats worked over the bodies, their faces grim and focused, their movements devoid of malice or glee. It was the detached, methodical curiosity of a watchmaker taking apart a new and fascinating timepiece. This was not murder, as Kalen's people understood it an act of passion or desperation. This was an audit. The drone's audio sensors picked up a conversation between two of the humans. Their language was a harsh, guttural variant of one the ship had cataloged as Ukrainian. But the drone's translation matrix, Cross-referencing the team's own linguistic data, pieced it together. Their cellular structure is remarkably fragile, one said, gesturing to Thorne's body with a stylus. High oxygen, low gravity evolution. A single kinetic shock above 20 Gs would likely cause catastrophic systemic failure. Useful. The other nodded, not looking up from a holographic display showing the intricate workings of a concordance multi-tool. Their neural interface is elegant, but unshielded. It's designed for trust, for open connection, a simple feedback loop, a recursive paradox, and their consciousness would collapse. It's like they never conceived of a lie. Kalen felt a wave of nausea. They weren't just learning how to defeat his people. They were learning how to unmake them. Soul and body. This hidden faction, whoever they were, had in a matter of days dissected and understood centuries of Signian technology and biology with a proficiency that was utterly terrifying. They had not just closed the technological gap, they had devoured it. The drone drifted into a central chamber, a vast, circular room that seemed to serve as a command center and, strangely, a sanctuary. The walls were lined not with screens, but with polished black stone. Etched into the stone, in thousands of different languages, were names, and below the names, dates and places. Auschwitz read one, Rwanda another, Nanking, Verdun, Hiroshima. Kalen did not know these words, but the drone, cross-referencing the planet's open information networks, began to provide context. They were places of death, of slaughter on a scale he couldn't imagine. Millions killed by millions. These were not memorials to the dead. They were lessons. In the center of the room stood a woman, her hair gray and cut short, her face a roadmap of scars. She wore a simple black uniform with no insignia. She was watching a holographic replay of one of Thorne's own archival logs, a peaceful recording of a Signian festival of light. Her expression was unreadable. Suddenly, she looked up, her gaze piercing the drone's cloaking field as if it were made of glass. "We know you're watching," she said, her voice calm, devoid of any accent Kalen's translators could place. She spoke in perfect, unblemished Signian. "You came here looking for a memory of peace. You found the custodians of war." An alarm shrieked through Kalen's console. The ghost drone had been locked by a targeted energy beam. But it wasn't being destroyed. It was being held in place. On his screen, a progress bar appeared, data upload initiated. They were sending him something. "You are a people of the past," the woman continued, her eyes fixed on the drone, on Kalen, hundreds of miles above. "You collect the stories of the dead. We are a people of the future, and our only story is survival. We have prepared for you since the first star in our sky looked back at us. Your mistake was not in coming here. It was in believing your history was the only one that mattered." The upload finished, the energy beam cut out, and the drone, its mission parameters screaming with contradictions, shot back towards the surface. Kalen sat frozen, his heart pounding in the silent control room. A new file now sat on his console, marked with a single symbol, a stylized skull overlaid with a diagram of a split atom. The file name was one word, truth. With trembling hands, he opened it. It was an archive, not of art or culture, but of conflict. Thousands upon thousands of hours of footage, battle plans, weapon schematics, casualty lists, and first-hand accounts. It started with grainy images of men in horned helmets hacking at each other with axes, then shifted to black and white footage of trenches and gas masks, of cities turned to rubble by aerial bombing. It showed mushroom clouds blooming over desolate plains, children screaming as their villages burned, and the cold, dead eyes of soldiers who had seen and done things for which the Signian language had no words. It was the complete, uncensored, unedited history of human warfare. The final file in the archive was an audio clip, the voice of the gray-haired woman. "You believe suffering is a tragedy," she said, her voice a cold whisper in the silence of the Requiem. "We know it is a tool. You collect ghosts. We have weaponized ours. Now you know what we are. Your judgment is requested." The video files began to play automatically. Kalen stared at the screen, unable to look away, as the first images of a battle called D-Day filled the screen. The roar of explosions, the rattle of machine guns, and the screams of dying men filled the sterile air of his ship. An ancient, brutal song from a world he had so terribly misunderstood. He had come seeking a lost golden age. He had found a planet of perfect, unadulterated violence, a species that had honed its soul on the whetstone of ceaseless war. And for the first time in his life, Kalen, the gentle historian, felt a terror so profound it felt like a religious experience. The socio-empathic wave wasn't the echo of peace. It was the psychic scream of a billion dead, a scream that had never, ever stopped. For 3 full ship cycles, Kalen did not sleep. He did not eat. He sat in the cold, sterile light of his private archive, a ghost haunting his own life, while the ghosts of humanity screamed at him from the holographic display. The truth was not a file. It was a deluge. It was a billion lifetimes of pain compressed into a single, perfect weapon aimed directly at the heart of his civilization's most cherished beliefs. He witnessed the methodical cruelty of a place called Unit 731, where human bodies were treated as objects for grotesque experimentation, a cold, scientific curiosity that mirrored the scene he had witnessed in the underground lab. He watched trench warfare from the Somme, seeing young men, boys really, ordered to climb out of muddy ditches and run into curtains of machine gun fire, their lives spent for inches of blood-soaked ground. He learned of ideologies that divided a single species into master and subhuman, leading to the industrial-scale extermination in the camps of the Holocaust, a word that felt heavy and obscene on the Concordance's placid translation matrix. These were not the chaotic death throes of a collapsing society. They were systems, methodical, efficient, and endlessly refined systems of slaughter. Thorne had been wrong in the most profound way possible. Humanity's art wasn't diagrams of death. Their entire history was a blueprint for it. The socio-empathic wave was not just a scream. It was a library of every possible way a thinking being could be broken. Every permutation of betrayal, every tactical application of hatred. And these hidden humans, these custodians, had not just studied it. They had mastered it. Kalen began to see the patterns the woman had spoken of. He saw how a feigned retreat in one century's battle became the basis for a corporate negotiation tactic in another. He saw how the psychological warfare used to break the morale of a besieged city was refined and perfected into the algorithms that now governed their global information networks, turning their own thoughts and fears into weapons against each other. They had been practicing on themselves for millennia. The Concordance, with its philosophy of open trust and shared knowledge, would not be a challenge to them. It would be a final exam. He finally emerged from his seclusion, his body frail but his mind forged into something hard and sharp. He requested an immediate audience with the ship's council, the same council that had so placidly declared Earth a fallen world. He stood before them in the grand chamber of echoes, a place of serene light and quiet contemplation, and knew it was a tomb, and they were the ghosts. He did not show them the truth, To do so would be like explaining the concept of a supernova to a child by detonating one in their bedroom. Their minds, so attuned to harmony and reason, would simply shatter. Instead, he presented a brutally sanitized report. He spoke of a technologically advanced, clandestine human faction. He detailed their reverse engineering of the whisper and their methodical analysis of Signian physiology. He described the vast, hidden infrastructure, proving this was no primitive anomaly but a deep-rooted, planetary-scale organization. He omitted the massacres, the genocides, the endless litany of horrors. He framed it as a strategic threat, not a moral abomination, hoping the cold logic of survival would penetrate their placid certainty. The council listened with growing disbelief, their luminous faces shifting from serene contemplation to expressions of deep concern, and finally, to offense. Elder Lyran, the council's primarch, a being whose wisdom was said to be as deep as the starfields themselves, rose to his full, slender height. "Xenolinguist Kalen," he said, his voice a series of soft, melodic chimes that now sounded gratingly naive. "You speak of things that are philosophically incoherent. A species does not achieve this level of technological sophistication through conflict, but through cooperation. It is the fundamental law of sentient evolution. You have misinterpreted their actions. Perhaps the loss of your mentor has colored your perception." Kalen felt a surge of cold fury. "With respect, Elder, their cooperation is entirely focused on the perfection of conflict. They see the universe not as a song to be joined, but as a threat to be neutralized. They view our philosophy of openness not as a virtue, but as a systemic vulnerability. They called it unshielded." Lyran's light motes flickered with irritation, a paranoid, xenophobic reaction from a traumatized culture. They have built a wall around their world, and now they scream at the shadows beyond it. The proper course of action is not to indulge their fears, but to demonstrate our benevolence. We will dispatch another vessel, a diplomatic envoy, fully transparent, broadcasting our peaceful intentions. Kalen nearly choked. That is the worst possible thing we could do. It would be like a lamb offering its throat to a wolf to prove it means no harm. They will see it as a test of their defenses. They will dismantle it. They will learn from it, and they will see our compassion as a terminal weakness. A heated debate erupted. The chamber's calm shattered. The council was divided. Some argued for a full planetary quarantine, a sterile barrier to contain this psychic plague. Others, like Lyran, clung to the dogma of peaceful outreach, convinced that any sentient race could be guided back to the path of harmony. None of them understood. They were trying to solve a puzzle, while the humans were playing a completely different game, a game whose rules were written in blood and bone. As the arguments reached a crescendo, the lights in the grand chamber of echoes flickered and died. The serene glow of the walls was replaced by an oppressive, absolute darkness. A collective gasp went through the council members. The silent requiem, a vessel that had never known a moment of system failure in its 500-cycle history, was suddenly dead in the water. Emergency lights, a concept so archaic they were barely remembered, failed to engage. For a full minute, there was only the sound of panicked, shallow breathing in the void. Then, the main holographic display, which a moment before had shown a tranquil star chart, flared to life. It did not show a face or a ship. It showed a single rotating object, rendered in perfect, high-definition detail the double helix structure of Signian DNA. Beside it, lines of their own medical code began to appear, highlighting specific gene sequences, the sequence for their empathic abilities, the sequence for their low-gravity skeletal structure, the sequence for their susceptibility to sonic frequencies above a certain decibel range. It was a complete, annotated diagram of their biological frailties. Then, a voice filled the chamber. It was the calm, measured voice of the gray-haired woman from the bunker, speaking flawless Signian, her words cutting through the darkness like shards of ice. Your debate is predicated on a false assumption that you have the luxury of time. You do not. We have been listening to your council's communication since you entered this system. Your encryption is VP like your biology, designed for trust. A fatal flaw. We have demonstrated our ability to disable your ship. We have demonstrated our understanding of your physiology. We are not screaming at shadows. Elder Lyran, we are the thing that hunts in the dark. Your judgment is now overdue. The display vanished. The lights returned. The ship's systems hummed back to life as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed, and the serene confidence of the council was gone, replaced by a stark, primal fear Kalen had never seen in his people. The debate was over. Lyran, his luminous skin now a pale, sickly gray, turned his gaze to Kalen. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified plea. What do they want from us? Kalen's mind raced. They had laid their cards on the table. A royal flush of intimidation. An attack would have been simple, brutish. This was infinitely more terrifying. It was a lesson. They were teaching the concordance the meaning of fear, and they had succeeded. The council's immediate, panicked consensus was to flee, to activate the long-range distress beacon, to summon the concordance fleet, a force that hadn't been mobilized for a war in 1,000 cycles, and to erase the system from the star charts. It was the reaction of a cornered animal, and it would be their end. No, Kalen said, his voice ringing with an authority he didn't know he possessed. That is what they expect. A response of fear. We have two options we run, and they will hunt us, because they cannot abide a witness who has seen their truth and fled. Or we respond. Not with diplomacy, not with threats, but with understanding. They have shown us their history, their language. It is a language of strength, of calculated response, of strategic respect. They have requested our judgment. We must give them one. Lyran looked at him, his ancient wisdom now a useless relic. What judgment can we possibly offer to monsters like this? Kalen took a deep breath, the weight of 1 billion human dead and 1 billion Signian lives settling onto his shoulders. We must judge them as they judge themselves, not as monsters, but as survivors. I will be the one to answer them. The council, leaderless and adrift in a sea of terror, fell silent. In their silence was a desperate, unwilling consent. Kalen turned and walked from the chamber, leaving the shell-shocked elders in his wake. He returned to his quarters, the ship's silence now feeling heavy and watchful. He stood before the comms console, the link to the planet below now open, waiting. He was no longer a historian. He was an ambassador to an empire of pain, a single, fragile voice tasked with composing the first sentence in a conversation that would determine the future of the galaxy. He had to learn to speak their language, and he had to learn it now. The message couldn't be a plea for peace. They would see it as weakness. It couldn't be a threat. They would see it as a welcome invitation. It had to be something else. It had to be a move in their game, a gesture of understanding so profound it would force them to see him not as a victim, but as a player. With a trembling finger, he activated the console. He would not send words. Not yet. He would send a coordinate. A single, precise location in the deep history of his own people. Not a golden age, not a moment of peaceful discovery. He would send them the coordinates of the Signian extinction event. The one time in their ancient history their race had been pushed to the brink of annihilation by a stellar catastrophe, the one memory of true existential horror they possessed. He would show them that they were not the only ones in the universe who had ghosts. He would show them their scars. The transmission was a single, silent burst of data, a string of coordinates and temporal markers that vanished into the ether. For hours, there was no reply. The silent requiem hung in the void, a ship full of scholars and poets holding their collective breath, trapped between the instinct to flee and the terrifying paralysis of the unknown. Kalen remained at his console, replaying his decision. It was a gamble of astronomical proportions. Arui, to a species like his own, sharing a memory of trauma was an act of profound intimacy and trust. To the humans, it could be interpreted as baring his throat, revealing the precise location of his civilization's deepest wound. He had either just opened the door to a new kind of dialogue or handed them the keys to his people's psychological destruction. The reply, when it came, was not what he expected. It wasn't a voice, a threat, or a data file. It was a single, low-frequency electromagnetic pulse, barely detectable, that resonated with the ship's hull. It was not an attack. It was a rhythm, a pattern, slow, deliberate, and mournful. It took the ship's astrometrician several minutes to decode it. The pulse was a perfect match for the seismic waves generated by the final, catastrophic crustal displacement of the Cygnian homeworld during their near-extinction event. Scaled and transposed into a different medium, they had not just received his message, they had analyzed the event, understood its physics, and were now playing back the planet's death rattle as a form of acknowledgement. It was the most chillingly empathetic gesture Kalen could have imagined. They were speaking to him in the language of his own apocalypse. Then, the woman's voice returned, not broadcast through the ship's main comms, but as a tight beam transmission directed solely at Kalen's terminal. It was a private conversation. "A stellar cataclysm," she said, her tone devoid of its earlier coldness, replaced by the detached curiosity of a fellow scholar. "Geological, not biological. Random, not intentional. Your species survived through unity and technological ingenuity. You faced the indifferent cruelty of the cosmos. You have never faced the focused, creative cruelty of a thinking mind. Your scar is a wound. Ours is a whetstone." Another data file appeared on his console. This one was much smaller. It contained a single set of coordinates on the planet below, in a vast desert region known as the Empty Quarter, and a temporal window that would open in 12 hours. It was an invitation. "You have shown us your ghost," her voice continued. "Now come and meet ours. One vessel, 3 beings. No more. Come unarmed. We will know if you lie. We have studied your mentor's memories. We know you, Kalen of the Requiem. We know you are a collector of stories. Come and hear one." The transmission ended. The rhythmic pulse faded, leaving a silence that was somehow heavier than before. The council was thrown into a fresh wave of panic. An invitation to the surface was seen as an obvious trap. They argued he was being lured to his death, that the moment a lander entered the atmosphere, it would be destroyed. A final, brutal lesson in human dominance. Elder Lyran, his authority now a shattered shell, pleaded with Kalen to refuse. "They have already taken your mentor. Do not let them take you as well. This is not a negotiation. It is a vivisection." But Kalen saw it differently. This was the next move in their game. He had made a gesture of respect by showing them his people's scar. Now, they were offering a reciprocal gesture. To refuse would be an insult, a declaration that he did not trust them, that he still saw them as mere monsters. It would end the conversation before it had truly begun. They could have destroyed us at any moment, Kalen argued, his voice steady. They disabled our ship with a whisper. They understand our biology better than our own medics. This is not a trap. It is a test. They are testing our courage. It is a currency they understand far better than compassion. He would go. He would take with him Lyra, the ship's chief exobiologist, whose mind was a fortress of scientific pragmatism, and Jorik, the stoic, silent head of ship's security, a being trained in the Concordance's forgotten arts of non-lethal defense, a philosophy he might soon have to abandon. Their lander, a small, swift vessel named the Stargazer, was stripped of all but the most essential systems. No weapons, no energy shields, no long-range transmitters. It was an act of calculated vulnerability, a statement of intent. As they descended through Earth's turbulent atmosphere, Lyra monitored the planet's biosignatures, her luminous face a mask of clinical focus. The planet's biosphere is in a state of constant, low-grade warfare, she murmured, analyzing the data streams. Predator-prey dynamics of an intensity I've never seen. Even the microbial life is hyper-aggressive. Everything here has evolved to kill or be killed. It's exhausting. And they landed precisely on the coordinates, in a sea of red-gold dunes that stretched to a horizon blurred by heat. The silence was absolute. The air, filtered through the lander systems, was thin and tasted of dust and sunlight. Waiting for them was a single, matte black vehicle that seemed to drink the light around it. It was low-slung, angular, and utterly alien to the Concordance's aesthetic of flowing, organic curves. The vehicle's door hissed open, and the gray-haired woman emerged. In the harsh, unfiltered light of her own sun, she seemed smaller, older, yet possessed of an intensity that was almost physical. She was flanked by two figures in sealed, black environmental suits, their faces obscured by polarized visors, their hands holding compact, projectile-based weapons with a casual ease that spoke of constant readiness. The woman wore the same simple black uniform. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met Kalen's. "Welcome to the Forge," she said, her voice unamplified, yet carrying easily in the thin air. "I am Director Anya Morozova, custodian of protocol. We appreciate your punctuality." Kalen and his companions emerged from the lander, their tall, slender forms a stark contrast to the humans' dense, powerful builds. "We came as requested," Kalen said, his translator rendering his soft, chiming language into the harsh syllables of human speech. Morozova's eyes flickered to Yorick, lingering for a moment on his powerful frame. "Your guard is tense," she observed. "He anticipates a threat, an understandable but unnecessary precaution." She gestured to the open door of the vehicle. "We have a long journey. The heart of this place is not on the surface." The journey was a silent descent. The vehicle was not a ground car, but the entrance to a subterranean transport system. They plunged deep into the planet's crust, the rock outside the viewport streaking by in a blur of geological time. They were entering another of the hidden complexes, but this one felt different. The one Kalen had seen through the drone was a laboratory, a place of cold analysis. This felt like a monastery or a tomb. They finally emerged into a cavern of impossible scale, so vast that a soft, artificial haze obscured the distant walls. The air was cool and carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone and old rock. They were in a library, but the shelves did not hold books or data crystals. They held weapons, thousands of them, arranged chronologically. The display began with sharpened stones and progressed to obsidian-bladed clubs, bronze swords, Roman gladi, medieval longbows, early flintlock rifles, and cannons. Further on, the instruments of death grew more complex: Gatling guns, mustard gas canisters from the First World War, the hulking shell of an atomic bomb, a fat man, identical to the one Kalen had seen in the archive footage of Nagasaki. And beyond that, the technology became speculative. Theoretical weapons that Kalen's people had conceived of but dismissed as too monstrous to ever create. Antimatter charges, kinetic bombardment rods capable of striking from orbit with the force of an asteroid, biological plagues designed to target and erase specific genetic markers. "This is not an arsenal," Morozova said, her voice echoing in the vast, silent space. "It is a catalog of our sins. Every item here represents a failure of our species, a moment when we chose destruction over dialogue, power over peace. We call this place the graveyard of ambition." Kalen walked slowly down the aisle, the history of human violence laid out before him like a sacred text. He stopped before a display containing a simple, terrifying object, a small, crudely made doll, its button eyes staring out with a vacant expression. Next to it was a canister bearing a skull and crossbones. "Proximity-fused toy bomb," Morozova explained, her voice softening for the first time. "Dropped from aircraft, designed to look like a gift, an object of comfort. Its purpose was not to kill soldiers, but to maim children, to shatter the morale of an entire population by turning their own innocence against them. It was used in a conflict we called the War in Afghanistan. It was effective." Lyra, the scientist, stared at the object, her usual composure cracking. "But why the expenditure of resources, the complex manufacturing for such a specific psychological cruelty? It defies logic." "It does not defy our logic," Morozova countered, her voice hardening again. "It is the core of it. We learned early that the body is a trivial target. The true battlefield is the mind, the soul. To win a war is not to kill the enemy, but to break his will to fight, to make him curse the day he was born. This is a lesson you have not yet learned." She led them to the center of the cavern, where a single and massive object was suspended in a shimmering containment field. It was a sphere of pure black, a perfect void that seemed to pull the light from the air. "And this," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is the final lesson, the one we built to ensure we never forgot the others." Kalen felt a cold dread emanating from the sphere, a psychic chill that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature. "What is it?" Jorik, the guard, took an involuntary step back, his hand instinctively moving to a weapon he did not have. "We call it the God Killer," Morozova said. "It is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It is a psycho-reactive, mimetic resonance engine. It does not destroy matter. It destroys belief. When activated, it broadcasts a complex, self-replicating idea, a mimetic virus. It targets the foundational axioms of a civilization, their faith, their philosophy, their hope, their very sense of self, and proves them to be a lie. It makes gods doubt their divinity, makes mathematicians question the truth of numbers, makes a loving parent look at their child and feel nothing but cold, meaningless biology. We designed it as the ultimate deterrent, the weapon you use only on yourself. The day we turned it on, our own species would have collapsed into a nihilistic stupor within a single generation." She turned to face Kalen, her eyes boring into him. We built this to stop ourselves from becoming the monsters you see arrayed in this hall. We understood centuries ago that our capacity for violence was limitless. The only thing that could ever truly stop humanity was humanity itself. This is our ghost, Kalen of the Requiem, the ghost of the thing we are capable of becoming. Now, you will give us your judgment. Are we the monsters to be contained, or are we the only sane species in a galaxy that does not yet realize what it is sleeping next to? The silence in the graveyard of ambition was a living thing, a presence as palpable as the cold stone beneath their feet. Kalen stared at the God-Killer, the sphere of perfect black, and felt an intellectual terror that transcended the primal fear he had felt on the ship. The weapons lining the walls were instruments of physical death, brutal but comprehensible. This was a weapon that killed meaning itself. It was the endpoint of a logic so cynical, so deeply steeped in the betrayals of their own history, that it was almost a form of art. A civilization that could conceive of such a thing, let alone build it, was not merely dangerous. They were post-moral. They operated in a philosophical space his people couldn't even map. Lyra was the first to speak, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. She approached the containment field, her analytical gaze scanning the subtle energy fluctuations around the sphere. "The mimetic propagation you describe," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It would require a carrier wave that could interface directly with the neural architecture of a given species. To be effective against an unknown enemy, you would need to possess a complete neurological map of their consciousness. You would need to understand not just their biology, but their very concept of self." Morozova gave a slight, grim nod. "Correct. Which is why your archivist Thorn's memories were so valuable. His mind contained not only a map of your own species' consciousness, but references and observational data on 217 other sentient races the Concordance has cataloged. A veritable Rosetta Stone of galactic psychology. We did not murder your mentor, exobiologist, and we would indexed him." Lyra recoiled as if struck, the clinical detachment in her eyes replaced by a flicker of horror. The full implication of Morozova's words settled over them. The bodies on the tables in that underground lab were not just being autopsied. They were being read. Every memory, every belief, every hope and fear, extracted and cataloged. This hidden human faction now possessed a working understanding of the Cygnian soul, and by extension, the foundational psychologies of a significant portion of the known galaxy. Jorik, the silent guard, finally spoke, his voice a low, rumbling bass that seemed to shake the very air. "You have prepared for a war against everyone. We have prepared for the inevitable." Morozova corrected him calmly. "History has taught us one undeniable truth. Any territory that is not defended will eventually be claimed. The galaxy is a vast, dark forest, filled with unknown hunters. For centuries, our species shouted into that forest with our radio waves and our clumsy probes, announcing our presence like a lost child. We were lucky. First hunter to find us was you, a passive, gentle collector of stories. What if it had been a species like the Morkathi Empire, which we have learned about from your archives, a race that communicates only through conquest? What if it had been a biological plague, like the one that consumed the Cygnus X1 entity? We do not prepare for a war against you. We prepare for a war against the fundamental nature of the universe, which is conflict and consumption." Kalen finally found his voice. He looked away from the soul-killing sphere and directly at Morozova. "And you believe this? Preparation absolves you of your actions. You dissected my mentor. You held my ship, my people, hostage. You have used fear as your primary tool of communication. How does this make you different from the tyrants in your own history whose weapons fill this hall? Morozova's expression did not change, but a new intensity burned in her eyes. Because we have never used these weapons on another species. We have only ever used them on ourselves. For 10,000 years, we have been our own greatest enemy, our own most brutal teacher. Every weapon here was built to kill humans. Every war we fought was a self-inflicted wound. We have put ourselves through a crucible of suffering that your philosophy of harmony cannot even comprehend. We are not tyrants. We are the survivors of a planetary-scale prison riot, and we have learned how to build a better prison. She gestured for them to follow, leading them away from the God-Killer and into a smaller, adjacent chamber. This room was different. It was not a museum of death, but a living command center. Holographic star charts filled the air, but they were not the serene, academic maps of the Concordance. These were tactical displays, alive with threat assessments, resource allocations, and predictive models of potential galactic conflicts. On one display, Kalen saw a simulation running a fleet of Cygnian ships, their own, being systematically dismantled by a swarm of small, fast-moving human drones. The simulation was running on a loop, each iteration refining the drones' tactics, making them more efficient, more lethal. "We call ourselves the Bastion," Morozova said, her voice echoing slightly in the command center. "We are not a government. We are an immune system. We were born in the ashes of the last World War. A small collective of scientists, soldiers, and philosophers who saw the trajectory of our species and knew where it would lead, and saw the promise of space travel not as an opportunity for exploration, but as a guarantee that we would eventually export our violence to the stars. We decided someone had to be the gatekeeper." She pointed to a map of Earth, overlaid with a complex web of glowing lines that connected dozens of hidden facilities like the one they were in now. "For centuries, we have operated in the shadows, guiding our own species' development, subtly suppressing technologies that were too dangerous, removing leaders who were too ambitious, always preparing. We built these shelters, these archives, these weapons, not to conquer the world, but to protect the galaxy from it. We are the wardens of our own prison. A self-imposed quarantine," Lyra breathed, her mind connecting the pieces. "That is why your development has been so chaotic. So many technological leaps followed by periods of stagnation and social collapse. You've been deliberately pruning your own societal tree." "Precisely," Morozova affirmed. "We allowed them their wars, their petty squabbles. They were a necessary release of pressure, a way to keep the species sharp, but we never allowed them to achieve true global unity. A united humanity, with its inherent aggression and relentless expansionism, would be a plague upon this galaxy. So we kept them fractured, divided, and focused inward. We became the secret, unifying enemy of every government on Earth. The conspiracy theory that was actually true. It was the only way." Kalen felt a dizzying sense of vertigo as his entire understanding of Earth, of the Concordance's mission, collapsed. They had not come to study a fractured, primitive race. They had stumbled into a meticulously managed planetary prison, and the prisoners had just taken the warden's keys. He now understood the truth archive he had been sent. It was not just a threat. It was a resume. It was the Bastion's proof of qualification for the job they had just assigned themselves galactic custodians. "So what is your judgment, Kalen of the Requiem?" Morozova asked, her voice quiet but insistent. "You have seen our sins. You have seen our purpose. You have seen the ghost that haunts us. Your council would have you run or bring back a fleet to burn this world clean, to sterilize the perceived threat. Your mentor would have tried to heal us, to guide us back to a peace we have never known and are not suited for. What is your judgment? This was the crux of it, the final test. His answer would not just be his own opinion, it would be the first official policy of a galactic power towards the Bastion. It would set the tone for all future interactions. He thought of the concordance, of its gentle, unshielded philosophy, of its belief in the inherent goodness of all life. That philosophy was beautiful, it was noble, and here in this room, it was suicidal. My judgment, Kalen began, his voice surprisingly firm, is that you are the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered. You are a paradox. You have embraced the logic of monsters to hold monstrosity at bay. You have become the thing you fear in order to protect others from it. Mehita Morozova's expression remained neutral, but Kalen could see a subtle tensing in her posture. He was not finished. But my judgment is also that you are necessary. The galaxy is not the harmonious choir my people believe it to be. It is vast and filled with shadows we have refused to see. We have been collectors of the dead, content to write eulogies for civilizations that could have been saved. You are a shield, a dark, brutal, and terrifying shield, forged in a fire we have never had to endure. He took a step forward, a gesture of immense significance in Signian culture, closing the personal space between them. The concordance cannot be your judge. To judge you by our standards would be a profound act of ignorance. You cannot be our wardens. To impose your philosophy of fear and control on the galaxy would be a profound act of tyranny. We cannot coexist as we are. One of us must change. Morozova's eyes narrowed. Change is not in our nature. We are what survival has made us. Then you will teach us, Kalen said, the words coming to him in a rush of terrifying clarity. You will not quarantine us from the truth. You will not protect us from the dark forest. You will show us, share your knowledge, teach us how to build shields, how to recognize threats, how to see the universe not just as a place of wonder, but as a place of danger. In return, Begvion, we will teach you. We will show you that not all strangers are hunters, that trust does not have to be a fatal flaw, that a shield does not have to be the only tool you possess. It was an offer that was both a plea and a demand, an alliance, not of governments, but of philosophies, a fusion of the Concordance's light and the Bastion's darkness. It was a path no one could have predicted. Morozova was silent for a long time. She looked from Kalen to the tactical displays, at the endless simulations of war and destruction, and then back to the tall, fragile, and impossibly brave being standing before her. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable, not hope, not yet, but perhaps consideration appeared in her storm-gray eyes. An exchange of ghosts, she murmured, more to herself than to him. You would invite our nightmares into your dreams. We would, Kalen said, his voice unwavering, because we have seen your nightmare, and we now understand that a galaxy where you are our enemy is a galaxy that will not survive. Anya Morozova studied Kalen, her face an unreadable mask of stone. The vast, silent chamber seemed to hold its breath, the ghosts of 1,000 human wars listening in. Kalen's proposal hung in the air between them, a concept as alien to her world as Thorne's naive diplomacy had been. An alliance, not of shared resources or mutual defense, but a symbiosis of philosophies. It was an audacious, almost insane proposition. To the Bastion, trust was a vulnerability, openness a strategic error. For centuries, Their survival had been predicated on the absolute certainty that they were alone, surrounded by potential threats. Kaylin was asking her to question the foundational axiom of her entire civilization. Yet, he had not flinched. He had looked into the abyss of their history, seen the weapon they had built to kill gods, and had not broken. He had not offered pity or condemnation. He had offered a new equation. Morozova turned her gaze from Kaylin to the tactical display showing the looping simulation of the Cygnian fleet's destruction. For 500 years, she said, her voice a low, grinding murmur. The Bastion has operated on a single principle. Humanity is a weapon that must be kept in its sheath. We have accepted our role as the necessary monster, the warden of our own kind, because we believe the alternative was a galaxy consumed by our ambition. Your proposal, it suggests a third path. She paced slowly before the console. We have analyzed every piece of data from your mentor's mind. The concordance is vast. You have outposts, listening stations, and archives in thousands of systems. You are a passive, galaxy-spanning sensor network, blind to the predators but exquisitely sensitive to the whispers of dying cultures. You see the universe as a library. We see it as a battlefield. You offer to teach us to read the books. We, in turn, would be teaching you how to see the enemy hiding on the page. She stopped and faced him again. This alliance you propose, it is not a partnership of equals. It would be the fusion of a sword and an eye. You would provide the sight we have always lacked, and we would provide the shield you have never known you needed. It is a more efficient model for survival than eternal solitary vigilance. Her logic was cold, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of the hope that underpinned Kaylin's offer. But it was an acceptance. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Orcs' rigid posture relaxed by a fraction of an inch. There are conditions, Morozova stated, her tone shifting back to that of the custodian. This is not a diplomatic exchange. It is an integration of protocols. A detachment from the Bastion will be stationed aboard your vessel. They will not be guests. They will be instructors. They will install a secure data core, a black box of our knowledge, directly into your ship's matrix. They will teach your people threat analysis, strategic cloaking, mimetic defense, the principles of asymmetrical warfare. You will learn to see the shadows. And in return, Kaylin asked, his own heart pounding. In return, Morozova said, you will open your archives to us completely. Not just your history, but your art, your philosophy, your understanding of societies that have achieved stability without self-cannibalization. You will provide us with alternative models. We have an exhaustive library of how civilizations fail. We require data on how they might succeed. We will treat your philosophy as a potential strategic asset, to be analyzed for weaknesses and strengths, just as we analyzed your mentor's biology. It was a cold comfort, but it was a beginning. The journey back to the Stargazer was different. The silence was no longer heavy with menace, but with the colossal weight of the agreement that had been made. As their lander ascended, leaving the red dunes and the hidden fortress behind, Kaylin looked at the blue and white marble of Earth. It was no longer a primitive world, nor a fallen one. It was the anchor of a new and terrifying galactic reality. Their arrival on the Silent Requiem was met with a suffocating wave of fear and suspicion. The council convened immediately, not in the grand chamber of echoes, but in the sterile, secure confines of the ship's central command. Elder Lyran's face was a mask of grim accusation. You have returned, He chimed, his voice stripped of its usual melody. "Alone. We had presumed you lost. What bargain did you strike with the primitives to purchase your freedom?" Kalen stood before them, with Lyra and Jorik at his side. He felt like a different being from the historian who had left. "They are not primitives," he stated, his voice clear and strong. "And I did not bargain for my freedom. I negotiated the terms of our survival." He explained everything. The graveyard of ambition, the God Killer, the Bastion's centuries-long self-imposed quarantine, and their chillingly logical worldview. He described the alliance, the exchange of knowledge, the fusion of their two philosophies. The council listened in stunned, horrified silence. When he was finished, the chamber erupted. Cries of heresy, collaboration, and madness filled the air. "You have been corrupted," Lyran accused, his body glowing with agitated light. "Their psychic plague has infected your mind. You would invite the wolf into the fold and call it a shepherd. You ask us to abandon 5,000 cycles of concordance philosophy, of peace and enlightened observation, and embrace the brutal, paranoid logic of a species that has perfected only the art of killing itself. This is not a path to survival. It is an act of cultural suicide. Our philosophy is a beautiful lie we have told ourselves in a quiet corner of the galaxy," Kalen countered, his voice ringing with a passion that shocked them all. "We are archivists of the dead because our beliefs prevent us from being defenders of the living. We mourn the ashes of empires that were burned by fires we refuse to see coming. The Bastion has offered us a fire extinguisher, and you are complaining about the color. They are monsters," another counselor cried. "No," Kalen said, his voice dropping, his gaze sweeping across their terrified faces. "They are what we would have become if the Signian extinction event had been caused not by a dying star, but by another race intent on our destruction. They are our reflection in a darker mirror." As the argument reached a fever pitch, a single calm, alert tone cut through the chaos. The ship's chief of communications appeared as a hologram in the center of the room. "Elder," she said, her voice trembling, "we are receiving a transmission from the planet, a massive data packet. It is being uploaded directly into our primary archives." Panic ensued. Lyran ordered the connection severed, but it was too late. The Bastion was not asking for permission. A new icon appeared on the main holographic display, the stylized skull and split atom. The file opened, and its contents began to stream across the screen. It was not a weapon. It was a map of the galaxy, but not the one they knew. This one was filled with red markers, designating potential threat entities, predicted expansion vectors, and civilizational choke points. It listed dozens of species the Concordance had cataloged as harmless or dormant, and provided chillingly detailed analyses of their potential military capabilities, their societal fault lines, and the most efficient methods for their theoretical subjugation or neutralization. It was a book of every potential hunter in the Dark Forest, written by the most dangerous hunter of them all. They were seeing the universe through the Bastion's eyes for the first time, and they were utterly, profoundly terrified. The final entry in the file was a simple text note. Chapter 1. Seeing the Shadows. Your instruction begins now. The council was silent. Their arguments, their philosophy, their entire worldview had been rendered obsolete in a matter of seconds. Kalen had not just brought back a story. He had brought back the undeniable, brutal truth. In the cycles that followed, the silent requiem was transformed. A contingent of Bastion instructors, led by Morozova herself, arrived. They moved through the ship's serene corridors like shadows, their black uniforms a stark contrast to the Concordance's flowing white robes. They were efficient, humorless, and brilliant. They installed their black box, a data core that became the ship's dark, silent heart. They taught the gentle Cygnian scholars how to encrypt, how to dissemble, how to fight in the war of ideas and information. In return, Kalen, now titled the First Emissary, began the slow, arduous process of teaching the Bastion. He opened the Concordance archives, sharing stories not of war, but of peace. He gave them the data on the Calthera, a species that had averted civil war through the development of a collective consciousness. He showed them the philosophical texts of the long-dead Urians, who had tamed their predatory instincts by channeling them into breathtaking, world-building art. He did not offer these as solutions, but as what Morozova had requested alternative models. The war was over, but peace had not returned. A new age had begun. The galaxy was no safer than it had been before, but now it was more aware. The Concordance, under Kalen's guidance, began a quiet revolution. Their mission was no longer simply to observe and mourn, but to watch and to warn. The Bastion, in turn, did not lower its shield, but for the first time, they looked through it and saw something other than potential threats. They saw possibilities. Kalen often stood in the Requiem's observation deck, which now featured a Bastion tactical overlay projected over the starfield. He would watch the serene beauty of the cosmos and the cold, hard data of potential threats simultaneously. He had brought the nightmare into the dream, and in doing so had created a fragile, vigilant reality. The galaxy did not know it yet, but it now had a guardian. It was not the gentle, benevolent protector it might have wished for. It had a warden, a quiet, watchful historian who had learned to speak with monsters, and a race of perfect warriors who were learning, slowly and painfully, to read poetry. Peace bloomed again in the galaxy, but it bloomed under the long, cold shadow of a species no one would ever underestimate again. Because now the keepers of the galaxy's darkest secrets were also its most vigilant protectors, and everyone, everywhere, was safer for it. They just didn't know why.